Do not click out of this video. I am about to teach you how you can tell the difference between a real Christian and a fake Christian. Stay tuned. Hey guys, I'm Joe and this is the Rebels Advocate. Let's talk about some fake Christians. So I'm having a conversation with this guy the other day, and he's telling me a story about in his past how some guy really screwed him over, stabbed him in the back, and as he was describing this guy, he informed me that he was one of those fake Christians. And he used air quotes when he said fake Christians, and that kind of confused me. So I was like, is he fake or not? You know, because if you said fake Christian, wouldn't that mean he wasn't fake? But I think the guy just didn't understand how to use air quotes. So he's talking about this fake Christian, and the story he told after that, I have no clue, because as soon as he said fake Christian, it was like my mind was just wandering off, and I just hear him talking in the background. I was thinking about fake Christians, and how many times I've heard that term used. And usually I hear it by, well, other Christians. You know, they're always talking about these fake Christians and these not real. That's what you hear the most, is like, well, they're not a real Christian. And so I'm thinking, you know, how do we tell who's the real Christian and who's the fake Christian? Now, spoiler alert, I'm not going to make you wait to the end of this video to see how I feel about it, but I pretty much believe that fake Christians, no air quotes, fake Christians simply don't exist. Matter of fact, I can only think of one example of an actual fake Christian. So how do we decide who is a real Christian and who's a fake Christian? Or better yet, who gets to decide that? It seems that every Christian you meet has their own standards for what is a real Christian, and it varies so greatly, you know. If you got 10 Christians in a room and you had them to look at another group of people, they would probably disagree on which of those people were, you know, those 10 Christians. Not only could they not agree on the group they're looking at, who's a real Christian and who's not a real Christian, but they're going to be looking at each other being like, well, there's people in this group that's obviously not a Christian. They shouldn't even be in here. And so you say, well, a real Christian is someone who lives by the Bible. Well, that's BS, because we know there's almost no Christians today living by the Bible, word for word. It's just, you don't see it. And the ones that live closest to it are so extreme, like it's basically illegal to live that close to the Bible. I mean, you're going to be murdering people if you live too close to the Bible, you know. And so you can't find that. So how do you decide? Who gets to decide? They all believe in the same basic tenets, right? They believe in the same basic theology. Most of them agree that there's a God. So if they all believe in the same make-believe, you know, the same mythical God, then they're all Christians. You see, the whole fake Christian thing is a trick. It's a trick to make Christians always seem like they have the high moral ground. They are the most ethical people, because they can point and be like, you know, our way is the best way. Living a good Christian life, that's the best way. And look at us. Look how spotless and clean we are. And every time you point out someone who's done evil in the name of religion, all they have to say is, well, that's not a real Christian. That's not how a real Christian would act. And therefore, anyone who does anything bad, completely cast out. You can't count those people. So the only people you can count are all the people doing good. As soon as they do bad, as long as they're doing good, real Christian. The day they do something bad, not a real Christian. And it's really tricky, you know, because you can say, because it kind of makes sense if you think about it. Like, when I was a Christian, it made perfect sense. Well, obviously, if they do something bad, they're no longer a Christian. You know, makes sense, right? Because they're saved and they're living by these guidelines. And, you know, we assume that to be a Christian, you have to be a good person. So, you know, it's not so much, and you can say, well, you're not saved by works alone, but of course, but if you are a Christian, you will do good. You will live like Jesus wants you to live. So as soon as you quit doing that, not a Christian anymore. So the Christians aren't held responsible for anything those people do. Imagine if you had a football team, and they have, you know, how all these players that play for, you know, name a team, the Dallas Cowboys, and one day it comes out that their one of their star players is molesting kids. You know, it's all over the news. And the coach comes out and holds a press conference, and he's talking about, you know, how practice is going and this and that, and how they hope to beat the, you know, whoever they're playing that Sunday. And the first reporter, of course, is going to ask, hey, how about Bob Smith over there raping kids? What's being done about, you know, how can you condone that? Why are you not talking about that? And the coach looks back at the reporter and is like, what are you talking about? He's not a real Cowboy. He's not really, like, he's never been a part of this team. You're like, whoa, what are you talking about? He plays every week. He's one of your star players. He scored more touchdowns than anybody else on the team. Yeah, but he's never really been a Cowboy. You know, that don't fly. That, you know, that's not going to work. Nobody's going to accept that. You're going to say, hey, he's a Cowboy. What are you doing about it? And of course, surely it would be like, hey, yeah, he was a Cowboy up until we found that out. He's gone. And of course, if he was raping kids, you know, he would be gone anyway. But say it was something a little less than that, but still horrible. It's like, yeah, we got rid of the dude. We kicked him out. We're doing something about that. We're taking steps to make sure that shit never happens again. You know, you would expect drastic measures like that. Where in the church, it just doesn't seem to happen. You know, someone does something bad, it's just like, boop, they're not a Christian. They're not a real Christian. They had to be faking it. It's like, but hey, we found out that this person's been doing this stuff for years. You know, there's cases where I just read a horrible story where a pastor in Tennessee, and I think I read this article over on Pathos, a pastor in Tennessee had been molesting and raping his 14-year-old daughter for like 2 years. And it came out, and he was prosecuted, and there's evidence of it. And he's going to prison. And that had been happening. You know, that didn't just happen, it had been happening. And this is one of those cases, so horrible, where you would kind of expect to hear, well, he wasn't a true Christian. But instead, you hear something even worse. Even worse. You see, there were people who showed up at the courtroom in support, and people from the church and from the community that showed up at the court in support, and you would think that's a good thing, because you would think they were showing up in support of the poor daughter who was abused for so long. But no, these people showed up in support of the pastor, who they believe just could not have done something this wrong. A neighboring pastor who knew him said it's just impossible. He's done too much good for the community. He's just such a good man. It's impossible that he could have done this. He's a fine Christian man, and this is just the devil trying to cut him down. And the worst part is the judge. I think they were going for like a 70-some year sentence on this man, and he ended up with like 12 years. Who knows what he could actually serve? You know, I don't know the details of that. But apparently the judge cut him as much slack as he could, because he was such a fine Christian man and a pastor, and he had done so much for the community, because he was like, what kind of, that, my friends, that right there, is a real Christian. Is a real Christian. That this kind of evil that we would literally religion they are using religion to shield that kind of behavior, to protect that kind of a monster. And I've heard stories like this from other people that's went through it, that's seen it, and some of these that never went to court because nobody believed the stories because they were too good of a man. There's no way that that man would have done this. You know, if you think the Catholic Church is the only, Christian organization facing these kind of accusations, no, it's happening right here in America in our Protestant churches. And a lot of these guys never even go to trial. Nobody believes the victims. It's impossible. And a lot of times it happens in communities like mine, in these small communities where, the church community is so strong. And then when it's your pastor and you've known him for years, here's the thing. When you sit in that church pew for years, and that man behind that pulpit is your link to God, and like you've believed that for years, to say that he did something that evil would basically be to say you had no discernment whatsoever, and you sit there and listened to a rapist and believed he was your connection to God. Now, it's going to be real hard for you to admit that, not only to others, but to yourself. And so, that's how these guys, these women, even women, and sometimes even family members of the victim, are like, there's no way that could have been, there's no way he could have done that. It's just, he's too good of a man. He's done too much. I've seen God move through him. I've seen the anointing fall down on him. The whole time these guys are up there preaching their heart out, shouting, running around the pulpit, dancing in the spirit supposedly. And the whole time while they're doing that, doing something so horrible, so awful. That is a real Christian. The same as the little old lady down the street who's never done anything wrong. They still believe in the same God. They still go to the same church. Sure, the little old lady, she's a much better person than that monster behind the pulpit. But they're still Christians. They still belong to the same organization. They still believe the same lie. Like, don't let Christians play that trick of pretending Christianity is somehow on this higher level because everyone who does anything wrong, we just kick them off. They don't count. And so that keeps Christianity spotless, without blemish. You can't point out any wrong that Christianity has done because as soon as you do, not a real Christian. You've heard, there's a name for it, no true Scotsman. I know I'm preaching to the choir to most of the people that probably watch this, but for Christians, like, I just can't get it through your head enough. Like, how do you get to point out who's the real Christian, who's the fake Christian? The guys down the road that seem a little too rock and rolly for you, their singing's a little too contemporary, and they got more young people and they dress a little more worldly. Well, those ain't real Christians. The Joel Osteens of the world, those ain't real Christians. They're just, I hate to break it to you, but they're just as Christian as you are. You belong to the same religion, and yeah, you're all a little different, but but you belong to the same group. And when I see such evil that is being done and when your organization is shielding monsters, like that pastor in Tennessee. Right before I come out here, I just happened across another article of a young lady who I think is like 20 years old now, and I think I may have read it on the same Pathos, the Friendly Atheist blog, and she's 20 years old, but when she was a child, she was born in a home that believed in faith healing. They also were conspiracy theory nuts, so, you mix these people that believe in every conspiracy theory, are afraid of the government, which, Not that I have much trust in the government, but you know, the people that are really out there with the things they believe and they're religious on top of it, boy, that's a bad combination. And so when she was young, she was born with a hole in her heart. And she said if she had had a surgery when she was 1 year old, it would have been no big deal. Well, I mean, I'm sure it wouldn't have been great, but it wouldn't have been, you know, she would have probably been fine. But they didn't do that. They believed in faith healing. They believed in faith healing. So they didn't give their daughter any care, and they said, we'll pray for you and God will heal you. And now she's 20 years old, and she's waiting. She's on a waiting list for a heart and lung transplant. And even if she gets that heart and lung transplant, she's not expected to probably live a very long life. She's not been able to do the things that a young girl should be able to do. Like, you know, she's been weak and just sickly. And now she's actually suing for her parents to be prosecuted for not giving her the care that she needed. And who knows if she'll be successful, because those parents are shielded by religion. You know, you got to have that religious freedom, because if we try to force parents to actually take care of their kids, well, that's infringing on their freedoms, apparently. So when I see people try to excuse it and not recognize religion as being this really faulty organization that is just, you know, for all the good you might can point to, there's a lot of bad, but they want to excuse it all because, well, fake Christians. They're not real Christians. You know, I'm just tired. You don't get to use that excuse. If you're following, if it would be one thing if they weren't somehow using that religion to protect themselves, if some of these people that do evil weren't using their religion to justify what they do, the people that discriminate and are bigoted and harmful towards other people because, you know, and they justify with the Bible and with their religious beliefs, they discriminate against other people because of their religious beliefs. You know, you don't get to tell me we're not real Christians. You know, let's point it out for what it really is. So stop letting Christians use that excuse on you. Oh, they're not real Christians. Yes, they're all Christians. They're part of your family. You know, you gotta stand, like, you. It's not that we're lumping you in the same sum and saying you're as bad as they are, but they're in your group. You need to address it. Address that you have problems within your own group and try to fix it. It's kind of, and you would think Christians would understand that, because I hear these Christians talk about the Muslims a lot. And they talk about how evil, you know, Islam is, and how Muslims are, you know, responsible for all these terrorist attacks and things like that. And you're like, well, it's not all Muslims. This is a small minority of Muslims doing this. And I'm not taking up for the religion of Islam at all. I think it's far worse than Christianity. But, and the Christians will say, well, you know, those good Muslims, as you say, they're responsible, like, for what the other people do. They need to stand up and realize what's going on within Islam. They need to fix it. They need to stand up against it. Then Christians, you need to do the same over here. You need to clean your own house. Take care of what's going on. When you hear about your pastor doing something horrible, and this just pisses me. This is going on so much that we, like, if you just read the stories that we know about, it's horrible. But I know, like, in my head, I know, like, just hearing the stories from other people and knowing in these small communities how much this has to go on, and nobody talks about it because because you can hide behind religion. Religion is such a powerful shield to monsters. It protects so many monsters. You have no idea. I mean, look at the Catholic Church. Now that it's breaking open, it's just like there comes a point where you're like, oh my God, is everyone in the Catholic organization just horrible monsters? Because that's what it seems like. It's like this is literally, this has to be one of the biggest criminal organization ever. Like, it's not just that, oh, they're not real Catholics, they're not true Catholics, they're not real Christians. Like, it's literally, the high-ups are trying to shield them, protect them, hide it, sweep it under the rug. That's what is so horrible about this. And we just keep hearing story after story after story. Trust me, if you think that's horrible, then good for you. That's great that you think that, because I would be really worried about you if you didn't think what's going on in the Catholic Church right now is horrible. But if you're a Protestant Christian here in the States or anywhere else, and you think that's not going on in our little country churches, and I'm not saying all, I'm not saying, your pastor is a pedophile. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's happening in so many churches. It would probably blow our minds if we knew, because it's such a shield. It protects monsters. How likely, young women that's been abused are usually very unlikely to even come forward at all. It takes so much courage to do so, and in just a normal situation, and a normal, an average person doing that to them. Now imagine if that person abusing them happens to be the most respected man in that community. The person that everyone looks up to. The person that people have thought was their link to God for years. Now, how do you think, how easy is it going to be for that young girl or that young boy to come forward and say what happened? And then when they do, what's the chances that anybody's going to believe them? Probably slim to none. This, I sit down to talk about this topic of fake Christians, real Christians. I kind of had in my mind of going one direction, and it just seemed like I got hung up on these stories of abuse going on in the church. Wasn't really the path, I was going to touch on it. Wasn't really the path I wanted to focus on, but it's definitely the thing that upsets me the most. And I'm so sick of it, and it's time that Christians wake up. I'm tired of this. Well, they're not real Christians, blah, blah, blah. You need to clean house, because when you make excuses and when you doubt, you don't want to listen to the victims that speak up about this, then you're just as guilty. You're just as guilty as the person doing the abuse. You're causing just as much harm. You're allowing this to continue. Now, I don't know because it hasn't come out on a scale. The Protestant churches here in America aren't organized like the Catholic Church. So when this starts coming out with the Catholic Church, it's just kind of like a domino effect. And we start seeing all of this. It would be much harder for these stories to come out that way in these Protestant churches in America, because they're, all these churches, most of these churches, at least around here, and they're not really organized. Like, you may have certain denominations that are pretty organized, but like the church I grew up in, there's no affiliation. Yeah, the denomination was Pentecostal Holiness, but we weren't, there was no affiliation with this other line of churches. It just went like we were our own individual church. If something happened in there, and I hope, as far as I know, nothing like that happened in my church. No, I honestly don't think it happened. I've never heard accusations. But if it did, if it had happened in my small church, that probably wouldn't have ever been a blip on any news coverage. It would have been so hard for that to even come out. First of all, the chances of anyone believing it, slim to none. And then if it did, even if the pastor went to jail, how much news would it make? Local news? Regional news? Would it, how far would it go before it just died out? we need to amplify it, like, and we have to count on Christians, unfortunately, to speak up and not let this happen. Don't let your religion, if you really feel that highly about your religion and you think your religion is true and you think it's sacred, then don't let your religion shield monsters, okay? Because trust me, I'm going to use that to point out how horrible and corrupt your religion is. So if you want a stronger argument against atheists like myself, then you need to clean house. You need to get rid of the trash. You know what? I want to end it on that. That's depressing as hell. I've done got myself all bummed out and ticked off. But like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Share the video if you want. And thanks to all my patrons and our $10 and above patron, Brandon Shaw. Thanks a bunch. And if you want to become a patron, you can do so at patreon.com/TheRebelsAdvocate. We'll talk to you guys later. Okay, before I go, I think I mentioned earlier that there was one form of fake Christian I thought could possibly exist, and I never did explain what that was. Here's the thing. The only kind of fake Christian I can imagine is an atheist who sees the horrible shit, that is a horrible person, like just the worst atheist you can imagine. He's a and they exist. Trust me, there's horrible atheists out there. So there's this atheist. She is a horrible person, and they look at what Christians get by with, or maybe they look at a preacher who's making a ton of money, preaching in a church, and they're like, I could do that, So they decide to become a fake Christian to reap the benefits or take advantage of people or whatever it is, and they don't believe in any of it. You know what I mean? Like, if you don't believe in a God, so you basically have to be an atheist and pretended to be a Christian, to be a fake Christian. Like, if you believe, I don't see how you're doing all the things and you claim to be, I don't understand how you can be a fake Christian. Anyway, that's my definition. In order to be a fake Christian, you'd have to be an atheist pretending to be a Christian. That's the only fake Christian I can think of. Otherwise, it's just all subjective and up to each individual person to tell you who's a real Christian and who's not, and it gets crazy, and there's no way to keep up with it, and there's no real system to actually categorize Christians and fake Christians.